What if I told you that Whitney Houston once stood on stage for 40 minutes, unable to sing a single complete song? What if I told you that 8,000 fans watched in horror as the greatest voice in music history cracked, whispered, and finally gave up mid-performance? And what if I told you that this wasn't just a bad night, but the moment everyone realized that Whitney Houston, the voice, was truly gone forever? The untold story of music's most heartbreaking collapse starts here. May 7, 2010, 9:47 p.m. GMT, National Indoor Arena, Birmingham, England. Whitney Houston walks onto the stage wearing a black sequined gown that hangs loose on her diminished frame, her once powerful presence now fragile and uncertain. Behind her, the band strikes the opening chords of "I Wanna Dance with Somebody," and 8,000 expectant fans rise to their feet, ready to witness magic. Instead, they're about to experience the most devastating 40 minutes in concert history, watching their idol's voice disappear in real time. The Nothing But Love European tour was supposed to be Whitney's triumphant return. After years of personal struggles, canceled shows, and vocal concerns, her team had convinced her that Europe's more forgiving audiences would provide the perfect comeback platform. Tickets sold out within hours across 12 countries. Fans who had waited decades to hear Whitney live bought flights, booked hotels, and prepared for musical transcendence. What they got instead was a public execution disguised as entertainment. The warning signs had been accumulating for months. During rehearsals in Los Angeles, Whitney's vocal coach privately expressed concerns about her range, which had contracted from 4 octaves to barely 2. Her breathing technique, once flawless, now required constant attention and conscious effort. Songs that she once performed effortlessly now demanded careful key changes and simplified arrangements. But the most troubling sign wasn't technical, it was psychological. Whitney had lost confidence in her greatest asset. The woman who once commanded stages with supernatural authority now approached microphones with visible fear, as if they might betray her at any moment. The European tour began promisingly in Prague, where a smaller, intimate venue allowed Whitney to mask her vocal limitations through careful song selection and supportive audience energy. Reviews were cautiously optimistic, suggesting that while Whitney wasn't at peak form, she remained a compelling performer with undeniable charisma. Birmingham represented a crucial test. The National Indoor Arena's 15,000 capacity made it the tour's largest venue to date, requiring vocal projection that Whitney's diminished instrument might not be able to provide. Her team knew the risks, but desperately needed the concert's success to validate the entire European comeback strategy. The day of the Birmingham show, Whitney's routine revealed the extent of her preparation anxiety. Vocal warm-ups that once took 30 minutes now required 3 hours. Steam treatments, honey and lemon concoctions, and throat exercises consumed most of her afternoon, while she obsessively practiced simplified versions of her greatest hits. Her dressing room became a medical facility, equipped with nebulizers, vocal sprays, and emergency medications designed to preserve whatever remained of her voice. The woman who once could sing for 3 hours straight now needed pharmaceutical assistance to attempt a 90-minute performance. At 8 p.m., as the opening act concluded and crew members prepared the stage for Whitney's entrance, her final vocal check revealed the devastating truth. She could barely hit the high notes that once defined her identity as an artist. The songs that made her famous were now beyond her physical capabilities. Her team faced an impossible choice: cancel the show and disappoint 8,000 fans while confirming industry whispers about Whitney's decline, or proceed with the performance in hope that adrenaline and audience support could somehow compensate for vocal limitations that were becoming impossible to hide. They chose to proceed, sealing Whitney's fate and traumatizing everyone who witnessed what followed. The opening number, "I Wanna Dance with Somebody," should have been Whitney's triumph card, a beloved up-tempo anthem that typically ignited audiences and established her command of the performance space. Instead, it became an immediate disaster that set the tone for the entire evening's collapse. Whitney's voice cracked on the first high note, not subtly, not forgivably, but audibly and unmistakably, in a way that made 8,000 people gasp simultaneously. The crack was followed by a pause, then a whispered approximation of the melody that bore no resemblance to the soaring vocals that had made the song famous. The audience's initial shock gave way to confused concern as Whitney attempted to continue, her voice alternating between strained whispers and occasional flashes of her former power that only emphasized how much had been lost. By the song's end, she was visibly struggling to catch her breath, and the audience's applause was more supportive than celebratory. But this was only the beginning of their collective nightmare. The second song, Greatest Love of All, represented Whitney's attempt to find safer ground in a ballad that required less vocal acrobatics. The strategy backfired spectacularly when she discovered that even her mid-range had become unreliable, producing a thin, reedy sound that bore no resemblance to the rich, full voice that had defined her career. Halfway through the song, Whitney stopped singing entirely. She stood at center stage, microphone in hand, while the band continued playing behind her. For 30 seconds, that felt like hours, she simply listened to her own backing track, unable or unwilling to continue attempting vocal gymnastics that were clearly beyond her current capabilities. The silence from the audience was deafening. These weren't casual concert-goers who might not notice vocal imperfections. These were Whitney Houston superfans who had traveled internationally, specifically to hear the voice they'd worshipped for decades. They knew every note, every run, every inflection of her classic performances, and they could hear exactly how far she'd fallen. Whitney's third attempt, I Have Nothing, became the evening's most heartbreaking moment. This song had historically showcased her 4-octave range and technical mastery, building from intimate verses to explosive choruses that demonstrated why she was considered the greatest vocalist of her generation. Instead, Birmingham witnessed Whitney whispering through verses she once belted effortlessly, then abandoning the song's climactic moments entirely when it became clear that her voice simply couldn't access the required notes. She began improvising new melodic lines that stayed within her contracted range, essentially rewriting her own classics in real time to accommodate her limitations. The audience watched this musical tragedy unfold with the horrified fascination of witnessing a car accident. Some fans began crying openly, not from joy but from grief. They were watching their idol's public humiliation and artistic death. 25 minutes into the performance, Whitney made an unprecedented decision. She began talking to the audience instead of singing. For 15 minutes, she shared memories about her career, expressed gratitude for their support, and attempted to create intimate connection that might compensate for her inability to provide the musical experience everyone had purchased. The monologue revealed Whitney's awareness of her situation. She acknowledged that her voice wasn't what it used to be, expressed hope for improvement, and thanked fans for their patience and understanding. But her words, however heartfelt, couldn't disguise the fundamental problem. People hadn't paid to hear Whitney Houston speak. They'd come to hear her sing. When she finally attempted to continue the musical portion of the show, the results were even worse than before. Where Do Broken Hearts Go became a whispered approximation of melody. One Moment in Time was abandoned entirely after the first verse. I Will Always Love You, her signature song and the performance that had defined her legacy, was attempted and then stopped when it became clear that she couldn't reach even the song's lowest required notes. The final 15 minutes of the Birmingham performance became an exercise in mutual embarrassment. Whitney knew she couldn't deliver what the audience deserved. The audience knew they were witnessing something tragic rather than triumphant. The band continued playing behind her, but their musical support only emphasized the absence of the voice that should have been soaring above their accompaniment. At 10:27 p.m., after exactly 40 minutes on stage, Whitney Houston simply stopped trying. She thanked the audience one final time, waved goodbye, and left the stage while the band was still playing. No encore was attempted. No explanation was offered. The greatest voice in popular music history had just publicly acknowledged its own extinction. The aftermath was immediate and devastating. Social media exploded with concert footage that documented every crack, every whisper, every moment of vocal failure. Professional music critics, many of whom had championed Whitney throughout her career, struggled to find diplomatic language for what they had witnessed. More importantly, the Birmingham disaster confirmed what industry insiders had suspected but hoped wasn't true. Whitney Houston's voice was gone, possibly forever. The instrument that had generated billions in revenue, touched millions of lives, and redefined what popular music could achieve had been destroyed by years of abuse and neglect. The remaining European tour dates were quietly canceled, officially due to throat infections, but actually because continuing would have subjected Whitney and her audiences to additional public humiliation. The comeback that was supposed to reestablish her relevance instead confirmed her decline in the most public way possible. For Whitney personally, Birmingham represented the moment when denial became impossible. She could no longer pretend that her vocal problems were temporary or that willpower alone could restore her abilities. The woman who had defined herself entirely through her voice now faced an identity crisis that would plague her remaining years. The fans who attended that Birmingham show carry a unique burden. They witnessed the death of something irreplaceable. Many describe the experience as traumatic, comparing it to watching a beloved relative suffer from a degenerative disease. They came expecting transcendence, and instead experienced profound loss. Today, Birmingham stands as a cautionary tale about the dangers of performing beyond one's capabilities and the cruelty of public artistic failure. Whitney Houston's 40-minute collapse wasn't just a bad concert. It was a public confirmation that some damage cannot be undone, some voices cannot be restored, and some legends are mortal after all. The greatest tragedy isn't that Whitney's voice declined, it's that she felt compelled to demonstrate that decline in front of people who loved her enough to travel across oceans just to hear her sing. Birmingham was supposed to be a celebration of enduring talent. Instead, it became a funeral for the voice that had defined a generation.